If this goal had counted, football today would look completely different. No goal line technology, maybe no VAR. And one of the biggest changes in football history might never have happened. What's even crazier, the referee didn't miss a decision that was too close to call. He missed a goal by almost an entire yard. Millions of people watching on television knew it instantly. The commentators knew it. The fans inside the stadium knew it. Even one of the players involved knew it. But somehow, the only people who didn't were the officials. And what happened next didn't just eliminate England from the World Cup. It forced FIFA to admit something they had refused to admit for years, that football's biggest stage could no longer survive without technology. But to understand why one mistake changed the sport forever, we have to go back to Bloemfontein. June 27th, 2010. The FIFA World Cup. Germany against England. One of football's greatest rivalries. Every meeting between these two nations carries history. The 1966 World Cup final. Euro 96. Years of unforgettable battles. And on this afternoon in South Africa, another chapter was about to be written. Germany started brilliantly. Their young team played with incredible speed. Thomas Müller, Mesut Ozil, Miroslav Klose, all constantly stretching England's defense. After only 20 minutes, Klose punished a defensive mistake and gave Germany the lead. 12 minutes later, Lukas Podolski made it 2. England suddenly looked finished. 2 goals down against one of the most dangerous teams in the tournament. But then, everything changed. Matthew Upson rose highest inside the penalty area and headed England back into the match. 2-1, game on. The momentum completely shifted. Germany suddenly looked nervous. England believed again. And just 5 minutes later, Frank Lampard picked up the ball nearly 25 yards from goal. He looked up, saw a tiny opening, and hit one of the cleanest strikes of his entire career. The ball exploded off his right foot. It flew over Manuel Neuer, hit the underside of the crossbar, bounced down, and came back out. England's players immediately celebrated. The crowd erupted. Commentators screamed, "That's over the line." For one brief second, everyone thought the score was 2-2. Everyone except the officials. And in that single moment, football history changed forever. For a few seconds, the match simply froze. Frank Lampard turned away, expecting to celebrate one of the biggest goals of his career. England's bench jumped to its feet. Even some German players hesitated. The ball had clearly bounced behind the goal line before spinning back into play. But referee Jorge Larionda looked toward his assistant. The flag stayed down, no goal. Play on. England couldn't believe it. Neither could millions watching around the world. Because this wasn't one of those decisions where you needed 10 slow-motion replays to figure out what happened. It wasn't even close. When television cameras replayed the incident, the truth was almost unbelievable. Like, the entire ball had crossed the line by roughly a yard. It landed well inside the goal before bouncing back out. It wasn't controversial because it was difficult. It was controversial because it was so obvious. And yet, football's biggest tournament had no way to correct it. While fans argued, Germany did exactly what great teams do. They stayed focused. England didn't. Only minutes later, Thomas Müller finished a devastating counterattack. 3-1. Then he scored again. 4-1, just like that. England's World Cup was over. Most people remember the final score. But almost nobody believes that score tells the real story. Because if Lampard's goal had counted, the match would have been tied 2-2 before halftime. England would have gone into the dressing room with all the momentum. Germany would have been under enormous pressure. Would Germany still have won? Maybe, maybe not. We'll never know. And that's exactly the problem. Football is supposed to be decided by players, not by mistakes that everyone can see. But here's the part almost nobody knew at the time. This wasn't simply an unfortunate refereeing error. It happened because FIFA had already been warned again and again and again. In fact, just 4 months before this World Cup, football's lawmakers had officially rejected goal line technology. Not postponed it, not delayed it, rejected it. They believed human officials were enough. They believed football should stay exactly as it had always been. And then, one shot from Frank Lampard proved they were completely wrong. The strange part is, the referee wasn't the only person making that decision. Standing on the touchline was assistant referee Maurizio Espinosa. For years, millions of fans blamed him. But the reality was far more complicated. Espinosa wasn't a full-time football official. His regular job was being a school teacher in Uruguay. And years later, when he explained something most fans had never considered, at that exact moment, his responsibility wasn't to stare at the goal line. It was to keep track of Germany's defensive line to judge a possible offside. That meant he was standing nearly 20 meters away, looking across the field, not directly at the bounce of the ball. By the time he looked back, the moment was already gone. One split second, one impossible angle, one decision that changed football forever. But someone else on the pitch saw everything. Germany's goalkeeper, Manuel Neuer. The instant Lampard's shot bounced behind the line, Neuer knew exactly what had happened. Years later, he admitted it. He knew the ball had crossed the line, so instead of stopping or looking toward the referee, he immediately grabbed the ball and restarted play as quickly as possible. Not because he thought it wasn't a goal, but because he hoped the officials would think it wasn't. And it worked. It was a masterclass in gamesmanship. Perfectly legal, perfectly intelligent, and brutally effective. While England protested, Germany kept playing. Neuer understood something before anyone else. If the referee wasn't certain, there was no technology and no second chance. The decision would stand. England's players surrounded the referee. The crowd roared. Television viewers were already watching replay after replay. But none of it mattered. In 2010, once the referee made his decision, there was no way back. No review, no screen, no invisible sensor inside the goal. Nothing. The goal simply never existed. And then something extraordinary happened. For the first time in years, FIFA stopped defending itself. Instead, it started listening. Because even its own president could no longer ignore what the entire world had just seen. Within hours, the debate wasn't just about England anymore. It was about football itself. How could the biggest sport on earth allow a goal this obvious to disappear? The timing made it even more unbelievable. Just 4 months earlier, football's lawmakers had officially voted against goal line technology. The answer had been simple. Football should stay human. Mistakes were considered part of the game. Technology had no place on the pitch. Then Frank Lampard's shot happened. And suddenly, that argument collapsed. Even FIFA president Sepp Blatter couldn't defend it anymore. Years later, Blatter admitted something remarkable. He said it wasn't years of debate that changed his mind. It wasn't pressure from clubs, it wasn't television. It was this match, this goal, this single moment. He realized football couldn't risk arriving at another World Cup and watching the exact same mistake happen again. For one of the biggest organizations in sport, it was one of the fastest policy reversals in history. Almost overnight, FIFA announced it would begin testing goal line technology. But football wasn't finished teaching its lesson. While the technology was still being developed, another almost identical controversy appeared. At Euro 2012, Ukraine thought they had scored against England. Marko Devic's shot crossed the line. Before John Terry hooked it away, once again, the officials missed it. Once again, millions watching at home could see the truth. It was another reminder that football couldn't keep relying on hope. The system had to change. Soon after, goal line technology officially arrived. For the first time in football history, a referee's watch could tell him within a second whether the ball had completely crossed the line No guessing, no impossible viewing angles, no debates lasting decades, and something even bigger happened. Once football accepted technology for one decision, the door was open. If technology could determine goals, why not penalties? Why not red cards? Why not offside? That single decision became the first domino. A few years later, VAR arrived. Love it or hate it, every review you watch today can trace its roots back to one shot in Bloemfontein, one goal that officially never existed. And perhaps the most surprising part of the entire story is Frank Lampard himself. He has never spoken about that moment with bitterness. Years later, he said he was actually glad it happened, because if his goal had counted, football might never have changed. The player who suffered the greatest injustice ended up creating one of the greatest improvements the sport has ever seen. There's one final twist. History had already written this story once before. In the 1966 World Cup final, England benefited from one of football's most controversial goal line decisions, when Geoff Hurst's shot was awarded despite decades of debate over whether it had fully crossed the line. 44 years later, the exact same country found itself on the opposite side of almost the same controversy. In 1966, England celebrated. In 2010, England suffered the same problem, the same type of decision, just with the roles reversed. Sometimes football has a strange way of balancing history, and sometimes one mistake doesn't just change a match, it changes the game forever.